Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries YouTube channel. I'm interviewing Megan Bennett-Burks, who is one of the authors of A Far Off Land, currently on Kickstarter. The Kickstarter page describes A Far Off Land as a multi-world spanning fantasy RPG, written by Megan Bennett-Burks and Jacob Poseen for the Fate Core RPG. Now, they're also going to include rules for Apocalypse World / Powered by the Apocalypse if they hit the $7,000 stretch mark. Now, as someone who's a fan of the Fate Core RPG and the Power by the Apocalypse system, that's got to be a big win as far as I'm concerned. So, thank you very much for joining me this evening, Megan.
Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Now, if you had to sort of like do like a capsule description of the actual game itself, if you were trying to sort of sell it to someone, as it were, how would you describe it? What are its sort of like unique features of the settings?
So you actually summarized it very nicely. It is a multi-world focused setting. One of the things that I really love in RPGs is the contrast between sort of the familiar, the world around you, the world that you grew up in, that you're familiar with, that you've lived in your whole life. This game has that, but it also has, in contrast to that, this other wondrous, fantastic world full of monsters and eldritch creatures and gods. So you can adventure within both of those worlds, and indeed, it's much of it is about sort of the interaction between these two realities.
Okay, excellent. So just to get a bit more general background, how long have you actually been, I suppose, playing or running RPGs yourself?
I've been playing RPGs since high school lunch breaks. When I started playing, the very first RPG that I played was actually Rifts. It was really, really huge at my school. After that, I played a little bit of second edition D&D, and after that, finally, I started playing some different World of Darkness games as that grew in popularity, and kind of just kept branching out from there.
Excellent. And I know you do a lot of freelancing work yourself. What was it that made you want to go into publishing and writing RPGs, and was it a difficult decision to make?
Oh, not at all. No, it definitely wasn't a difficult decision. So, ever since I was, a little knee-high little girl, I've liked to do creative things. I've liked to draw. I like to write. I wrote all my little, fiction pieces when I was a little kid, and then I even that like never went away as I grew older. And then when I started running RPGs, I started hacking Pathfinder and hacking different systems and coming up with my own sort of settings. I mean, those were really just for my home group. Leaves of Chiaroscuro just started out as a Pathfinder Renaissance era hack, and it just grew from there. I was like, finally, you know what, I think I have something here. I'm going to release it. I'm going to convert it over to Fate, and it changed a lot, and here I am. Now,
you mentioned Leaves of Chiaroscuro, which, as you say, is your Renaissance fantasy campaign setting that you did for the Fate core system. Now, obviously, I was lucky enough to play in a game that you ran yourself. I think it was last year.
Yeah.
Obviously, your co-author, Jacob Poseen's known for work on Jade Punk and lots of other sort of Fate stuff. How did the collaboration between the two of you actually come about on this project?
It was actually really pretty simple. I started posting on the Fate G+ forums, which are fairly active, and I was thinking, I really liked working with Fate for Leaves a lot. I want to do something else in Fate. And I just put a ping out that, I'm looking for somebody who I can collaborate with to build another RPG. And I was thinking, this thing's just going to be maybe 40, 60 pages. Of course, it became a lot more than that. Jacob was pretty much the first person that stepped up, and I was really, really impressed with the other things he had worked on. So I was like, oh, this is pretty awesome. Yeah. And we started going from there.
Now, I know your previous game, as we say, Leaves of Chiaroscuro, used a period that's been a little bit neglected by some sort of more popular RPGs, the Renaissance period. And I know I've seen you post several times in G+ that you're a big fan of historically based games. What is it about these sort of historically based games that appeals to you? And will there be any sort of historical leanings in A Far Off Land?
That one's hard to say. I've enjoyed reading history books. That was another thing I did a fair amount of when I was younger. I loved real world ancient religion and lore, and there's just, I guess it's that real history. There's nothing that can be nearly as rich as that. No fictional world can be as sort of just multi-dimensional as the real world. So you just have an awful lot to play with, almost too much in some ways. But I guess that's part of the appeal, and just the idea that our world could be different if just these few different things happen to them. That's actually another part of why I like that A Far Off Land is in at least halfway in our reality. You can explore all kinds of present day issues. You can sort of change history a little bit if you want to explore what if scenario. And part of the what if scenario is that there's gods and magic that are sort of in these two different worlds interacting.
Now, you mention a different world and the characters being almost these sort of like demigod-like figures in a far-off land. Is that something that you found easy to do using the Fate system? Have you had to tweak it in any way or make any sort of alterations to sort of achieve your vision of your campaign setting?
Oh, they work great in the Fate system. So Fate is it's amazing for larger-than-life characters. Characters in Leaves were not quite so larger than life, but the demigods, the Fated, are very larger than life. They have, Jake was saying some of the inspiration he drew when he was building his elements of them was a lot of anime, and that sort of like super heroic, powerful entity is definitely there. We did modify some ways that stunts work in this system to represent their sort of dualistic shape-shifting nature, and we do have a magic system incorporated, but it didn't take a huge amount of tacking on new rules. I don't think it's going to be overly cumbersome.
Okay, now the Fated, as you say, are shapeshifters. Now, if I recall, in Leaves of Chiaroscuro, there were a few sort of shapeshiftery character types in that work. Is this just a coincidence, or are those a sort of character that very much appeals to yourself?
Oh, and definitely not a coincidence. I mean, one of my favorite monsters has always been the werewolf. But shapeshifters, and I guess you could even do Fated as kind of a werewolf-like creature if you wanted to. But shapeshifters, there's a lot of dimension to explore with them as well. They express a lot of things about the human condition, and you can tackle them from different arenas. Take, for instance, sort of the person who's a misfit. They don't fit in anywhere, but they've got skills that allow them to kind of adapt and alter themselves to their social environment. In a way, shapeshifting is sort of an exaggeration of that sort of chameleon-esque idea. They don't really belong anywhere in the same way a creature that is just of that one place would, but they can change themselves and sort of fit in anywhere.
Okay, excellent. Now, you've talked about how the characters are sort of two worlds, and they're these very powerful and sort of larger-than-life characters in a far-off land. What's the sort of the main shtick, if you will, of the campaign set? You know, if you have to be stereotypical, you might describe something like D&D as you're going off on a dungeon crawl to get treasure, etc. If you had to sort of distill down the type of stories that you envision being told with A Far Off Land, the type of games you envision being run, how would you describe that?
So it's very much court and faction based play. So you're going to be interacting with a lot of organizations that have different goals and agendas. Some of those agendas could simply be politicking to sort of gain the upper arm of influence over another faction. There could be sort of intrigues, sort of infiltrating different factions. One of the quests that we think will be a lot of fun is when there's interactions between factions of one world and those of another, and sort of that journeying back and forth to deal with the different organizations.
Now, I know in addition to your RPG writing, you've also posted a number of illustrations that you've done yourself on Google+. I was wondering, how much will a Far Off Land be illustrated by yourself, and how much is illustrated by other people? Have you got involved with that side of it again, as you did with your previous project? Yeah,
so some of my illustrations will be in the book. I don't think I'm going to be the predominant artist, but it just depends on how funding pans out. But we also have Jennifer Bone and Tanya Porn Sangsnit, and we probably will have other artists as well. Yeah, I love putting my own illustrations into the work as long as I can get to them to the point where I'm happy with them and I think they fit.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you feel differently about projects where you've just written on a project, or I say just written, but you know what I mean, when you've predominantly done the writing part of it, as opposed to when you've also illustrated it? Is there any sort of difference in how you approach works when you're doing one and not the other?
Yeah, I mean, when I am using my own illustrations and doing my own layout and everything, I've put a lot more of myself into the work, so that makes a difference. But at the same time, it's a lot more work. It's harder to do. I'm not always necessarily happy with my own art sometimes as I am with other people's, because I guess I can be my own worst critic. That's a common thing I get told. At the same time, using other people's illustrations, it really does add up.
Now, you've said that the Fate core system fits particularly well, but as we said earlier, you're also planning, assuming you get enough funding, to do a Powered by the Apocalypse version of the rules. What is it that made you decide to go with the possibility of like a dual system?
So, to be honest, part of the reason is I really just want more excuses to make something in Apocalypse World. I've been hacking with that system a lot, using a ton of different, variations of it for my home group that I run games for, but I haven't released anything in it yet. I think it's a spectacular system. I have a little bit of a crush on it at the moment, so an excuse to use it's great.
I can't argue with you there. I mean, I'm a big fan of Dungeon World and stuff like that myself, for being games that are sort of very easy to pick up and play. Now, in terms of if someone were to back a far off land, and let's say this was the first or one of the first RPGs they played, how easy do you think it would be for them to pick up a far off land and sort of get it off and running straight away? Do you think it's an easy game to do that with, or would it require a little bit more sort of involvement?
I think that it will be pretty easy, especially since Fate has that virtue. I mean, there's some people whom Fate just doesn't click for, and that's always going to be the case for any game, but it's multi-layered, so you can start off sort of with the basics of the system and sort of wean your way onto the system and the setting and add from there. It's not going to fall apart if you don't throw every bit of it in there at once. And I think that makes it easy. It's like an onion, different layers you can add.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's all the questions I have. Obviously, A Far Off Land is currently on Kickstarter at the moment. I know the last post I saw from you were saying you were sort of halfway funded. How are you doing at the moment?
We are at about 65% funded. I think we only need maybe 1,300, 1,400 left or something. So that's got me excited, but also extremely anxious and nervous. I'm just like, refresh the page as it tick down, refresh the page as it tick down. Like, oh, I gotta go do something else. Yeah. So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, you've got about 20 or so days left on the Kickstarter, is that right?
Yeah, we've got, I can actually look. As of this time, 21. I'm crossing my fingers and hoping.
Okay, well, obviously I've been reading the Kickstarter page prior to this, and obviously also in preparation for this recording. So anyone who's interested in a sort of interesting spin on almost a sort of modern take on fantasy that uses the Fate core system, you're looking for something a little bit different, again with very sort of high action heroes, this sort of larger than life sort of demigod style heroes, I'd urge you to go and check out A Far Off Land on Kickstarter. Like I said, as of the time of the recording, there's 21 days left to go, and they're over halfway funded. It'd be great to see them pushed all the way to get the full funding, and if we can get that extra funding to get that sweet Power by the Apocalypse rule set as well, that'd be absolutely grand. So before we finish the interview, Megan, is there anything else you'd like to say in closing about A Far Off Land? Oh, just that I'm really looking forward to seeing this get pushed through and continuing to work on it. It's been a lot of fun. Jacob Posine's been excellent to work with. And after this, I don't want this to be the last thing I work on. I have a lot of ideas, maybe too many, so after this, it's on to other things. And we have some great stretch goals, too, including one where customers, clients, they can get involved in, I guess they're backers. I'm new to Kickstarter, so I'm using wrong terminology here already, where backers can get involved in making a monster, an artifact, or other custom game content and get that in and get that illustrated. And just a last sort of I suppose closing question: how have you found the whole process of running a Kickstarter? Because as you say, you're sort of fairly new to it. It's been really interesting. I mean, it's a lot of figuring out, do I advertise a lot? How do I spread the word? I've been mostly using social media. That's been pretty effective. That sort of whole debate of how often do I post updates? Am I bugging people too many? Are they going to worry with too few? There's a lot of the first time you're kickstarting sort of
racking your brain, kind of being a little insecure, wondering what the next step is. Fortunately, I'm working with people that have more experience than I do, and they know what they're doing, so that has helped, definitely.
Okay, and if someone were to come up to you and say that they were thinking of getting involved in writing an RPG or maybe kickstarting an RPG, what advice would you give to them as someone who's done that yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Before you start getting it out there, and especially before you start trying to get Kickstart funds, have it at least half written. I mean, more than that's better. If you can get it almost entirely written, it just needs to be looked over by your backers and then edited and all that good stuff, then you're going to be in a much easier position. There's much less of a risk of the game being late. We made sure that our game was mostly complete by the time we started kickstarting it, and we had art to show off. You really, really want some great visuals. I think that's helped us immensely. Our artists are really fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the most successful Kickstarters I've seen are the ones where they've pretty much got all the text finished and they just need a little bit of polishing on that, and maybe they're trying to fund to get the artwork or get some more artwork for it, or just do a few stretch goals. But like you say, they've got sort of 99% of the book done, so they can avoid it being late. So thank you very much for joining me, Megan, for this. It's been great to chat with you about A Far Off Land. And as I've just said, anyone who's watching this, if you've got an interest in sort of fantasy, modern fantasy with a bit of an interesting spin on it, or you're a big fan of the Fate core system, I definitely advise you to go and check it out on Kickstarter. As of the time of the recording, it's still running, 21 days left to go. It'd be great to not only smash the total, but to get some of those stretch goals as well. So again, thanks very much for joining me, Megan.
Thank you.
And we will see you all later. Thank you very much.